quick anecdote here. Swear to God, I believe I was the only one in the theater Tuesday night at 7 o'clock for the Amazon Prime member early screening of Superman. I think I was the only one wearing a Batman shirt. I completely true story. I think it was the case because I kept looking around, and obviously I'm not going to be able to account for every single person that was in that theater because it is IMAX. Was rather large, but the main shirt that I kept seeing over and over and over was the official Superman James Gunn Corn Sweat logo. With different variances of blues. Some of them had the accurate blue that he has in the movie, and then others had like a much more darker, navier kind of color. And it quickly made me realize that my girlfriend was right in stopping me from purchasing a shirt like that, because then I would have looked like completely everybody else, and I wouldn't have stood out as, like I said, probably the only one wearing a Batman shirt. Now, to be fair, I wasn't necessarily wearing this shirt because it's kind of like Batman Beyond. It wasn't this one, but it was the Pattinson Batman red logo, because that's arguably the one that I wouldn't mind seeing be paired up with Corn Squid. If it ends up not being the case, that's fine, but it's just like the one that I would advocate for being the DCU Batman. But if it ends up not being the case, that's completely fine as well. And I feel that a little stronger now, having seen the movie and having it be its own part of the universe that Gunn is now kickstarting along with Peter Safran, who are overseeing the DCU, DC Studios, and this is their official first step in creating the first chapter, which they have dubbed Gods and Monsters, a phrase that is technically kind of utilized a little bit during the opening prologue of the film. And even though that this is the official start of the DCU, technically we had the unofficial start on the smaller screen with Creature Commandos, which was an animated series which I did watch, did enjoy despite its problems. It looks like a little bit of a consistent level of quality is found here within the Superman movie, where I really did enjoy it, and my key takeaway from the film is getting this like vibe, this feeling that the DC universe is more or less in really good hands going forward with the remainder of this first chapter of Gods and Monsters, but also just the creative direction and the vibe. You know, it passed the vibe check, as a lot of kids like to say. Now, moving forward, no spoilers. There's going to be a very spoiler-free review, a very quick, just, you know, very deep thoughts, impressions of how I felt about the film, almost a whole 48 to 72 hours later, because I had half of mine to propping up the camera and going either live or at least recording practically the next morning. But then there was something about the film that still made me go, let me sit on it for yet another night. Let me take another night to sleep on it and really see exactly how I feel about this film, really gauge how people are kind of receiving it, how I'm receiving it, how I'm kind of letting it marinate on myself. And it coming from, as you can kind of tell from the shirt, as well as the Batman shirt that I was wearing in the actual theater during my screening, I am more of a Batman guy. And I have been more so of a Batman guy ever since my early teenage years, somewhere around 11 or 12, where I started, despite having seen a good chunk of like the Schumacher movies, a little bit of Keaton. I didn't really grow up with Keaton like that, but I saw, you know, I had Forever on VHS, and then eventually Christian Bale and Christopher Nolan took over the helm. And those movies really resonated with me and started to kind of plant the seeds of wanting to be in the filmmaking industry around that time. But that's kind of what then started to mold me more so into becoming a Batman fan, more so than a Superman fan, even though I still have very fond memories of replaying the Christopher Reeve movie over and over and over on VHS, and even watching a little bit of the Lois and Clark show with Dean Cain. And, you know, just kind of having fond memories of that, and then ever so often catching the animated series and even the Justice League series on Hispanic television after Batman the Animated Series finished. But even after all these years, I still resonated with Batman a little bit more, and it kind of stayed that way, even with different interpretations of the Man of Steel, in a way that never really kind of swayed me to kind of go back into that camp, not to not look at Superman that same way in terms of like grabbing the figures or buying merchandise or checking out the movies in a very quick day one on their sort of style. but it looks like maybe a little bit of that is going to be changing with this new Superman film because, again, it did in fact instill in me a sense of hope. It really did. Mainly, not only for the portrayal of the character, for the actor David Cornsway who makes him his own, but also for the first step in the direction that this new DC universe is going. And in a general sense, I feel like James Gunn was able to get Superman. He got the character. He understood the way all of the different like ideologies and the things that he stands for. Sometimes naively to a fault, but in a very, as the movie often tries to write on this theme, in a very human sort of way. In a way where Gunn is approaching this less so as like a biblical, very godlike level, like Snyder did, because I know that when Snyder's mentioned, like, oh my god, we have to like choose one or the other. First of all, that's completely and utter total bullshit. Please stop that. You can like both. And this is, again, coming from someone who's not only a Batman fan, but also really enjoyed Man of Steel. I actually kind of like it more than I did back then. Because back then I walked out of it thinking it was okay, and then over the years I thought to myself, actually, I kind of am enjoying Man of Steel more and more and more as the years went on. And I absolutely love the fight scene between Batman and Superman in BVS. The rest of the movie is shit. But that sequence, I still go back to it ever so often on YouTube. So even with those things that I thoroughly liked, even Man of Steel as a whole, really enjoying that movie. This movie, however, it's difficult to not give a little bit of merit to what some people have said, which is that it definitely feels like a live-action interpretation of the Superman animated series. However, sometimes to a fault. And not in a good way, like I was commenting on Cornsway's portrayal, where, like I said, he sometimes is too much of a Boy Scout, too much of a Boy Scout for his own good. And that's a good core strength within the film, and Cornsway plays him very well. The rest of the cast is also spectacular, as far as Rachel Brosnahan as Lois Lane, really liked her. Nicholas Hoult as Lex Luthor, he actually might be one of the best Lex Luthors. I'm sorry. The only thing that I guess before I get to that, there's like a scene where Nicholas Holt's character is doing something with his voice that I'm like, yeah, this feels kind of unique to him, but at the same time, there's maybe a little bit of inspiration from some past Luthors, whether it be Hackman or hell, I'll say it, even Spacey. I know that some people are going, oh my god, trigger warning. Stop it. Be mature, come on. There's something kind of taken there, but at the same time, Holt is able to kind of take it and transform it into something of his that makes me go, yeah, I can see this Luthor as being a bit of a, not only a dick, but also a menace in the right way, to where whenever him and Superman are kind of butting heads and literally staring at each other in like the same room, I genuinely do see Superman and Lex staring down. And it feels, like I said, a live action version of the animated series brought to life. With that said, at times that hurts the movie, because I saw one review say that the frenetic pace of the film, of how this movie is just constantly going, can serve as both its strength and as its weakness, and I concur with that statement. In regards to how this is probably the fastest, the movie's like a little over 2 hours, like 2 hours and 9 minutes, something like that. This is arguably one of the fastest 2 hours in the movie theater you're going to have this year, by bar none. However, at times that does hurt the structure of the film, to the point where I'll kind of take what people have been saying about the movie feeling like a 2 hour long episode of the Superman animated series, and then go, it's more so, it kind of skews more in the direction of feeling like it's 3 or 4 episodes of the animated series compiled together, to the point where sometimes it makes the editing and, like I said, the structure of the writing a little jarring, to where I can't help but put the half of me that is a comic book nerd, a superhero geek, a little boy, push him a little off to the side, and then have my filmmaker, movie critic part of my brain go, yeah, but we're still watching a movie, and a movie still needs 3 acts. And sometimes the movie has muddled acts transitioning to one another in a way that doesn't gel, to the point where even the editing sometimes cuts to black and then we just cut, and I interpret that as like oh, the episode ended and now the next episode started. Because there's times where, as some people have remarked, we're jumped right into the fray, and from a conceptual standpoint, from a big picture standpoint, I appreciate that. I like that the movie opens up with, like I said, in a way where we don't see the origin story. We're not, revisiting old ground as far as the Superman mythology and tackling it a bit more head on. I appreciate that. Sometimes I don't necessarily want it to be too literal, even within 20 minutes of the movie. This is not necessarily a spoiler. Again, I'm keeping it spoiler free, and it's not really a spoiler because you already know from the trailers that Superman's gonna have to fight a big giant kaiju creature. Well, there's really no build up to that kaiju creature fight. We literally just jump to it. We cut to it. And you could argue that there's a build up in the form of seeing it as like a baby kaiju. You've already seen some of the merch of the baby kaiju. But again, going back to my analogy of feeling like it's more so of episodes compiled rather than one big live action Superman animated series episode, it almost feels like the tease of the baby kaiju is like the ending of an episode, and then the jumping to the fight and Superman already trying to stop this kaiju feels like the opener for like the next episode. And in an episodic sort of way, if I was watching it through a streaming service or on TV, would have felt natural. But within the movie theater, I need to feel like I'm watching a movie, and at times I didn't feel like I was watching that. I felt like I was watching episodes compiled, and that's why sometimes a little bit in that middle, it struggles with that. Even when it comes to certain, plot devices that I felt kind of awkward because of that structure. Lex Luthor makes a move on Superman. Hold on, phrasing, not that way, but rather a strategic move to try to take Superman down. And the rippling effects of this move happen just way too fast. And I get it. Again, if I was to have been watching this in animated form or as an episodic sort of thing on TV, it maybe would have been easier to digest. But within the film, I was like, this is weird. Like the way that things are, switching and people are switching on a dime. I'm like, this is a little strange and a little awkward. More questions. There needs to be a much more natural reaction. And what the reaction that I'm watching right now is just doesn't feel natural to me. But it just needs to happen because things need to start moving forward to get us to that next episode, because they know that they only have 2 hours to work with. Hell, hot take here, but maybe if the movie was a little beefier on the 2.5 hour side, it probably would have had a little bit easier, space to breathe. But I have this fear in me that filmmakers going forward are going to start making these movies no longer than 2 hours and keep it at that cap, because they know that audiences' retention spans these days are just getting worse and worse and worse, and I'm scared that Gunn is doing that not only with his structure, but also a little bit with the humor, to where sometimes I'm like, this joke didn't work, it could have been cut, but he left it in there anyway, because sometimes the crowds that we have on social media probably respond to a little bit better rather than the general audience that are not on social media that way. So, and from the beginning, that style of humor that Gunn has always had has always been a little bit divisive, even going back to the original days of Guardians of the Galaxy, or even further beyond that with movies like Super and Slither and things like that. And even the movies that he just wrote and didn't direct, like Scooby-Doo, or even on the video game space with Lollipop Chainsaw. And comedy has always been subjective. But this is one of the few moments where I do think that he could have pulled back a little bit with a character like Superman. You don't treat Superman the way you do with Guardians, and at times you can almost see Gunn kind of be like, but if I could just do one joke, and like, no, and like someone's like pulling him, and I can see that, for lack of a better term, because we do have a super dog in here, Crypto, I have to use the term, the leash kind of getting pulled on Gunn, and sometimes that leash comes in the form of Crypto himself, to where we do, as adorable as Crypto is, sometimes a little bit of that favoritism by Gunn, who self-admitted that Crypto's modeled after his dog, sometimes like the scene needs to move on, and yet we're still on Crypto, and I'm like, I get it, he's cute, but let's focus. Sometimes you need to help the betterment of the picture, and there's times where gun is doing gun and not the picture, and Superman was doing a little bit of that. With that said, like I said, there's times where I'm looking at Corn Sweat wearing the suit, taking flight, doing his action stuff, and I truly do feel like I was watching Superman on screen. And his chemistry with Lois Lane is just off the charts to where I'm like, these two have something going on behind the scenes. I wouldn't be surprised. But him and Nicholas Hoult, like I said, I generally felt like I was watching a frame of the animated series where Superman's kind of crossing his arms like, I'm watching you, Luthor. After that first pilot episode, it brought me back to those moments. And, different sequences where, like I said, it truly did feel like something's terrorizing the town and Superman has to come in and get it. Watching the rapport between the people over the Daily Planet, I did like them. And amongst all the characters that people were fearing were being a little bit jam-packed, at times it did feel like maybe you could have pared down a few on the characters. But if there was one big happy takeaway from the included characters that maybe did not need to be here, I'm at least happy to report that one of them ended up being the standout. And he was so terrific at being the standout. Yeah, jokes aside there, Mr. Terrific almost makes me regret not picking up the McFarlane Toys figure, because he was kick-ass in the movie in ways that I was not expecting. I was like, whoa, okay. I was expecting him to pretty much be on the same level as far as like screen time and effectiveness on the plot as what Guy Gardner and Hawkgirl ended up being, which was, pretty decent. I liked them enough, but could I have like given or taken them? Yes. Terrific, on the other hand, he was one that I looked at and went, ooh, yeah, he may or may not need his own show or some kind of like special within the DCU, because he made that much of an impression on me. And, again, Metamorpho was also kind of neat as well, but at times it started to get a little too, like I said, animated series, a little too comic book, to where, like I said, if I had a little bit more time to breathe with like an extra 15 to 20 minutes, I think it would have been a little easier to kind of absorb, to keep it within Metamorpho's terminology. But at times it did feel like it was compiling onto itself. But did I still enjoy the film an awful lot? Did I still feel hopeful not only for the DCU, but also look at this embodiment of the character and made me go, hey, I would still be down to own the figures. I would be down to buy myself a brand new Superman shirt. Yeah, I walked away from this film going, I think I'm ready to believe that a man can fly again in the form of this incarnation of Superman. No, and don't interpret this as a pitchfork being tossed in the direction of Henry Cavill, because I did enjoy him as Superman. It was just a much more godly biblical Superman, and whatever criticisms we have towards that direction, take him up with Snyder and with Goyer and with all the collaborators on that script, because it was more so in the writing and those creative decisions. If you didn't like that, take it up with them. I personally, however, did see Cavill as his own flavor of Superman, and I see Corn Sweat as a much more human, much different flavor of Superman that I think is a pretty good one that I would like to see interact with other characters. His rapport with the other characters, especially the Justice Gang, as Guy Gardner would like to continue to refer to it as. I bought it. I bought his, like I said, his chemistry and his romance with Lois Lane, and the smart decisions they made with their whole thing as far as whether or not they should lean towards the Clark Kent persona, albeit it came at the sacrifice of a good old-fashioned shirt pull. There was none of that. That was a bummer. That was probably the only real spoiler that I'll go ahead and reveal there, is that there was no shirt pull there. But at the same time, you can kind of tell that maybe Gunn was using that as a form, as a metaphor, or as an analogy, whatever, as a physical illustration in the frame to say that we're not trying to go through those tropes once more, which then encompass the whole flying in the rocket ship and all that stuff. So, taking all those things into consideration, I would give this out of 10 I'm somewhere between a low to just a middle of the road solid 8 out of 10. Seeing that IGN review, I thought to myself, well, frankly, I actually kind of concur with that rating, and it's definitely an 8 out of 10. It never really got close to a 9 out of 10, to be quite brutally honest. And a couple of times I was worried that it was falling into 7 territory, but where it ended, I thought to myself, you know what? You got some smiles out of me. And for being the cynical bastard that I am, which explains my heavy resonation with a character like Batman, this is a Superman that I can look at and go, and think about that phrase that some people that I've been hearing. I don't know who coined it. I don't know who originated this quote. I have absolutely no idea, but it's a perfect quote when it comes to our world's finest heroes from DC, Batman and Superman. Batman is who we resonate with. Superman is who we aspire to be. And right now, this particular Superman is definitely someone I can look at. This portrayal of the character is someone that I can look at and go, yeah, I can see a very pessimistic son of a bitch like myself aspire to hopefully one day have a little bit of that optimism that this Superman has. And that was good enough for me. So, if you guys have seen Superman by the time you watch this video, let me know down in the comments. No spoilers. Keep it spoiler free. I will be checking out the comments, so take that how you will. But I'm looking forward to what kind of discussions you will have down below of the film. Did you like it? Did you not like it? Do you guys appreciate this direction? And what kind of right steps would go forward with the DCU as far as that Gods and Monsters chapter, and what right moves they could take in the direction to kind of keep this consistency going. And apart from that, I will hopefully do... I'm going to wait until maybe like next week to do an actual spoiler deep dive. Even though I gotta be honest, that's probably one of the few strengths about the movies, that there's not any major spoilers. There's like one maybe big one, but apart from that, there's really not anything huge that in terms of like grand reveals or, you know, stepping stones for the remainder of the DCU, the way that Marvel kind of does, or at least Marvel does these days, in a way where I'm like, okay, this feels ironically, despite the gun-isms that he failed to restrain himself on certain occasions, he at least managed to show some restraint in planting an awful lot of like sequel bait. I can kind of take again some credit, or at least some relief in that. This, again, arguably one of the stronger things about this movie, but I still think that it warrants some discussion, and I'll talk about that in broader scale during some kind of like spoiler discussion on like a live stream sometime next week when more people have gotten to see the movie and actually, you know, like I said, absorb it and see exactly what their kind of takeaways were. Hopefully I'll see some of you guys there, and until next time, stay humble, and I'll see you later.